Okay, we should, just crossed, be live. Once again, good to see you all here. Thank you for joining me in the studio again. It's been a while, I know. Had a few little issues with my back that has made it a little bit painful to sit down for any length of time. So although I've been doing a little bit of painting, I could really only do about 10-15 minutes at a time before I then had to lay on the floor. So that's not that conducive to a live video stream. Anyway, if there are any problems, please let me know. For example, audio is not working. That's usual, quite a typical thing for me. Or I'm on the wrong camera, so I'm talking to you and it's on the camera's on this shot or that shot or whatever. But anyway, just let me know. In fact, let's have a look first of all, see if we have any well, before I do that, I hope you'll remember the painting that we were working on last. So this is the sort of garden wall, and as you can remember, I changed it slightly just with the inside there, or that view through the doorway. I turned it into more of a view in a reference photograph that you can probably see here. It's just a brickwork. And also at the top here, there's, I don't know what that is, some tiles or something. So anyway, we've added a little more interest, but we are going to, I've been looking at this for the last 2 or 3 minutes while I've been setting up. And obviously, in ordinary circumstances, I would start working on the distance first. So I'd be working in the area in the doorway. But you know what? The most interesting bit is the wall itself, and it's probably not an element of a painting that you've seen me paint before. So I think we're going to start with that. Now I've already been doing a little bit of work this morning on a different project, so I have the palette already with some paints on there. So I think we've got all the paints that we need. So I suppose really, let's have a look, first of all, at some questions. There are 3 of you joining. Hopefully we'll get some more. So let's have a look. Just grab my phone for a moment. So you will see me looking down at my phone just to see what questions we have. Okay. So Susan, thank you for your comment. Good morning, Michael. Looking forward to today's live stream. Have your children shown any interest in sharing your love of painting? Well, not massively, I have to say. My eldest is 16, so he's finished his exams. He's ready to go off to college, and he's studying music. So, you know, he's showing an interest in the arts, but in painting itself, not so much. He's actually quite good at painting. During his GCSEs, he had some art projects. He took art for GCSE, and you know, he did pretty well. But I don't really think it's his bag. My middle child is 13. No, he's not really shown any interest. And my youngest, he sort of dabbles a little bit. But if I think about it, I'm not 100% sure I was that interested at that age. I'm just having a look at a comment down here. Okay, yeah. Just wanted to check that everything was working right. It seems to be, so that's good. But also, when I was growing up, having a dad as an artist, and he worked from home, so I was around his artwork all the time, whereas I work away from home, and that suits me a little bit better. But the kids aren't, you know, in and around my work and seeing paintings and all that sort of thing. So maybe because they're sort of that little bit more removed from my work, maybe that's why they're not showing as much interest. But you know, we'll see. Okay, so I'm going to answer a few more questions and then we're going to get painting. Jim, thank you, Jim, for joining us. Hello from Canada. Hi, Canada. I hope your back is feeling better. Thank you very much. It is feeling better. Can you please talk a bit about the initial pencil sketch, as I'd be interested in knowing how you do it? Thanks. Yeah, surprisingly, I get a fair few comments on the sketch and how I do the sketch. Well, I And I suppose your main question really is how I transfer the image, the reference photograph, the sketch onto the actual panel. How do I get from the photograph to the panel? Well, over the past, I've used a few different methods to try and do it, and more often than not, if I'm painting either for myself or I'm painting a landscape for a gallery or a customer or whatever, I don't use a grid or anything like that. I literally just work it out. So I'll say, for example, if we were looking at this picture here, I would say, okay, let's have a look at the reference photograph, which is here. The doorway is pretty central, so make sure that it's sort of quite central. I would work out the distance. So I would say, for example, the distance in between the doorway here, so from wall to wall, is a little bit less perhaps than this part here. So I'd just be doing a general working out, nothing too much, because it's not important, certainly for a landscape, that everything is in the correct place. Branches don't need to be precise. The shape of the tree doesn't matter too much. It's not. I'm not trying to copy it so faithfully as if I was painting something that was hyper realistic. So that's the first thing. But with the lesson, so on MGS TV, on my art school, I provide a sketching diagram. And I've taken to using that a little bit more. For example, if I'm painting something that does need to be accurate, like a portrait or a still life or something like that, where you need accuracy, that's when I think you need to start, going a little bit above and beyond just general, working it out generally. So the sketching diagram. So all I would do with that is I would divide this photograph into, it doesn't matter how it's divided. This is a 12 by 12 inch panel. I could divide it 12 by 12. I could do that, or I could divide it 6 by 6 or 3 by 3, or I could divide it, in, I don't know, two squares by 2 squares. It really doesn't matter how you do it. And it doesn't even need to be even. So I can divide this, twice horizontally and then 3 times vertically. It doesn't matter how you do it, as long as you do it the same on the actual panel. So I would draw my grid over the top of the photograph. I would then draw the grid on the blank canvas or panel in my case. So the grid is then copied. And then what I would do is I make sure, in fact, I wonder if I've got a sketching diagram here. Okay, yes, let's use this as an example. So this is a painting that I've just recently finished. This is for my painting school. So you're seeing it here first. So this is clearly a line. I don't know whether you can see that in the. Yeah, you should be able to see that. So I've just divided it into square inches just because it's easier. This is a 12 by 16 inch panel. I divided the panel into, drew the same grid on the panel as I have in the photograph here. And then all I've done is I've literally looked at every single square and I've copied just the contents of that square. So if we were working on this square here, I would look at this line that is coming in here. How high is that line? Is it near the middle? Is it nearer the bottom? Whereabouts is it? And you might even want to grab a pencil. Now I would say the center line for this square that we're working on here, the center line is about there. Let's zoom in a bit to make it easier for you. So the center line is here. So looking at where that line intersects, but if I then halve that line again, that would be half. So that's quarter, that's half, and of course that would be 3/4. And it's just a little bit above. So in my sketch, I would just try and get that in roughly the right place. Now, where does it finish? We can do the same thing again. We can say, well, that's the middle of that square, roughly. And I would say it's not far off 3/4 of the way through, maybe a little bit less. And I would do the same up here. Where does this line the top of the main here, where does that cross? And I would say that's pretty much in the middle. So these are the things I do, and then I sketch it in, then move on to the next one. It's quite time consuming, but you will get better at it as you go. But it is important, especially with a subject like this, it's important for that to be accurate. In fact, let me give you a sneak peek. I'll show you, hold on 1 second. I don't have to move far. I'm just going to show you a sneak peek of the painting that I was working on, the painting that I'm telling you about. Probably not very well lit there. Let's hold it up here. So there we go. That is the painting that's coming up on MGS TV, and that is, it's important that everything is in the correct place with something like this. So you take a little bit more time. Anyway, there we have it. Let's put that back 1 moment. Just prop that up. Okay, so that hopefully answers your question. If you want me to go into more specifics, just let me know. It's a very basic idea of how I sketch. Also, how much detail in a sketching diagram or in a sketch, how much detail do you actually need to put in? Well, it does depend very much on your subject. But for example, if I'm painting a landscape, I'm sketching a landscape, I tend to sketch where I want to block in, not all the details. So for example, if you've got a sky and you've got leaves and branches coming over the top of the sky, so you can see maybe 50% through that tree, you can see a lot of the sky behind, I won't block in like that. I'll do that afterwards. So I'm only going to sketch the blocking. I'm not going to sketch the leaves and the branches and all these things. So that hopefully that answers your question. Just have a quick, let's have another look, see if there's any more. Okay. Gormagan, I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Thank you for your message. Hope your back is better. Yes, it is. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your concern, everybody. I notice you don't use them in any of your tutorials. Do you use them at all? And what are they for? Filbert brushes. Sorry, I didn't read a line of the question there. Filbert brushes. You know what? I'm not 100%. I'm not sure I've ever used. I don't think I've ever used a. Have I ever used a filbert brush? I'm sure I have. I'm sure I must have done. Let me have a look and get some idea of. Just having a look on the internet. Familiarize myself exactly with what a filbert is. Ah, yeah. Yeah. I think I have used them. Why don't I use them? I don't know, really. I just, I don't suppose I've ever really found a proper need for it. Blocking in, I suppose, would be one place. In fact, for those of you, do you all know what a filbert is? I say you all, there's only 4 of you on here, but let me show you. So can you see that? That is a filbert brush. Yeah, I would possibly use one for blocking in. Detail-wise, probably wouldn't need something like that afterwards. But to be honest, it probably wouldn't be a great deal different from my Series 7s. I mean, this is the smaller one. But yeah, I just never really used it. Don't know why. Probably would if I had a few. I'd probably use them. But also, I think running the school, I try and keep everything to a minimum. So I try and keep the colours, to a minimum, and the brushes that I use to a minimum, just because it makes it easier to collect all of the products before you start yourself. If I had, if I used twice as many colours, then it becomes a bit more difficult for you and a bit more expensive for the students. So I'll try and keep everything to a minimum. But yeah, I mean, I probably would use it myself if I had some available. But yeah, there we go. Right, so that's answered a few questions. We probably will have a lot more. But I'm going to start working on this now. So let's have a look. What are we looking at? What are we looking at? So there's a fair amount of detail in this wall. And it's very, very sharp as well. Obviously we can see this is like a very, I actually don't know where this is based, this photograph, but this is very typical. These walls are very typical for sort of northern England, and I love them. I just think they're rustic. I think they're absolutely beautiful, and they look very, very difficult to paint because of all the detail in there. But we're going to try and simplify it and make it a lot easier for you. And this technique you can really use for so many different things, so many different subjects. But the main brush we're going to be using to begin with is the tree and texture brush. So we're looking to add some of this texture before we then add the darker elements. Okay, well, I say the darker elements, all the gaps in between the stonework there. Right, so knowing that we're using the tree and texture brush, and also we know that this is blocked in as near as a middle tone as we can get, we now need to add the darker elements before we then go ahead and add the light parts. So what we're going to do is go over to the palette shot now. I've got to try and remember to come away from the palette shot. Shout if I don't, because I've got a habit of staying there. And I think probably for that reason, we're going to not use the palette shot too much. We're going to use it when we need to and no more. Right, so we have our thinner. We have our paints, of course. Some of these paints, as I say, I was using in a painting I've just been filming a YouTube video for, and we have ivory black, cobalt blue, dioxazine purple, cadmium orange. I think that was Windsor yellow, I think. Burnt umber, cerulean blue, that is cadmium yellow, and sap green. In here, we have Galkid medium. So that's, if I can get the lid on, that's best way to show that. Where's the top? Where's the top? Galkid. It'd just be easier if I do that. Galkid medium by Gamblin. I think I've explained this in the past. I tend to use this Gamblin's Galkid if I'm using regular oil paints, which these are. These are just regular oil paints. I use that over liquid because it dries a little bit quicker. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the painting, look at the photograph. We are going to find a dark element, but not because the darkest bits are in these little grooves here. Let's zoom in again. So the darkest bits are in the gaps. We're not doing that at the moment. We are going to do the darkest bits in. So if you find an actual piece of stone itself and look for the darkest element in there, it's actually not super dark. That is the color that we're looking for. So, and we're going to use the medium for this as well, because this is going to give us more of a watered down, washed down version of the dark color that we need. Is going to allow us to get a glaze in. So as you can see, all I've done is I've added black. No, you can't see because we're on the wrong bit. So here we are. Let's start again. So I've put the medium on the panel, on the palette. I've added just black. That's all I've done to begin with. I'm going to make sure there's not too much on the brush. Go back to the painting shot again. Right, let's start first of all on this side here. So as you can see, I'm putting very little pressure on. I'm just using the corner of the brush, and I'm adding just texture over the whole thing, really, very much like that. We don't want too much paint on the brush. If there's too much paint on the brush, for example, I'll just show you here. Can you see how now all of a sudden that's dark? It's not as sort of spaced out as this. So you need to adjust that by wiping. Let's just get rid of that a minute. You need to adjust that by taking a little bit off the brush. Just move the brush around, almost take it off on the palette first. Okay. And then just continue. So very light pressure. The pressure also is important. If you put too much pressure on, once again, you have the same problem. So we take that off. That might be okay for something like trees, I suppose, but not so much this. I'm just going to go pretty much over. I mean, I would go over the whole thing, but I think for the purpose of the video, we're going to do a section of this. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty boring viewing for you. But, you know, if you want to ask me any questions while we're doing this, I shall try and answer them. So you can go over and over it. Another benefit to using the Galkid medium is, yeah, it's going to allow this paint to dry pretty quickly. Now we can even go over this lighter area. Now, a question you may have, and generally speaking, it's considered, well, I was always taught that it wasn't quite correct, and that's just using neat black. I'm not really sure why that is the case. I guess you tend not to get neat black anywhere, but certainly not in nature. But this is just a glaze, so the black is just darkening the color below. So we've got this kind of tan color, and it's just darkening it. It's not actually black. Well, it's black that we're putting on, but it doesn't look black once it's on, if that makes any sense. So yeah, we're going to do a section of this wall. So this is another interesting thing. This is another very good reason why I block the painting in, rather than, you know, start or add a coloured ground that I know some artists do. But as you can see, we are not entirely covering over this blocking. This blocking can be seen. It's going to be seen even when the painting's finished, because all we're doing here, we're using that blocking colour, we're using that bed to our advantage. We're just adjusting the colours and the details of it slightly. And already, I think the colour's looking pretty good. The detailing is looking quite good. You know, nothing is clean, is it? In actual fact, everything's got a certain discoloration or a texture to it, or some stains or whatever. So if you need to darken any areas, you can actually go over the area again. So you can go over the same ground. Okay, I'll do a little bit more, and then we can start working on the some of the details. I'm just sort of a little bit conscious that, you know, this early part, this early stage doesn't bore you too much, because it's a little bit, it can be a little bit tedious. This is generally the stage where my mind starts to wander when I'm on a painting like this, because you don't need 100% concentration, just trying to get a nice even amount of detailing in here. I'm going to go right up to the edge. Right, just put a bit more black on. Still enough medium there, I think. As we start to move nearer to the top here, in fact, I will show you that as well. I'm just going to move up a little bit further. But the wall itself is becoming a bit darker because it's in shade. The shade that is being cast by the growth above. I don't actually know what that plant is, but it's casting a shadow. So I'm holding the panel while I'm doing this solely because it's making a noise. It's rattling against the top of the panel there, which is slightly annoying. So I'm pushing it against. There we are. Stops there. Quite often, what I do is because the panel here that the painting is resting against, it's not 90 degrees vertical. It's sort of leaning back slightly, but not that much. So what I tend to do is I actually stick this with tape. I put tape on the back of this and I stick it to the panel, and that keeps it in place so that when I'm filming, nothing moves. But in this instance, I haven't done that. Okay. There we go. Don't mind it getting a little darker as we go up. In fact, I am going to just do that little area because I just want to show you how we do the leaves over the top in a moment as well. So as I said, to go darker, we can go over that area a little bit more with a little bit less medium. So it's the colors, it's not neat, but it's nearer, you know, there's less medium in there, less transparency. So we're getting that darker. In fact, you know what we might do? Let's put that over the top here, that photograph, so that we can compare it. The photograph's a bit smaller, I know. Let's put that there. Now, because this is being covered up by the leaves, I'm not worried too much. I just want to darken it. But you can see by using black, it's quite a good color to do this if you are darkening, especially if you are painting a glaze, because it does just darken the color that's underneath. As you can see up here, that's actually, the darker areas are quite brown. And that's because it's it just adjusts the color below, the levels of the color below, rather than the tones so much. Okay, so you know, there we go. We've got a little bit of texture there. I'm going to put that brush to one side now. What we're going to do is move over now to the rigger brush. So I have here, let's have a look what we've got. Okay, so I've got a series 1 size 0 there, and I've got a series 1 size 1 there. That should be fine. I was just about to say that one is not, it's a little bit old, that one, so it hasn't quite, it's not going to work quite as well, but it's good enough. It's good enough for what we're doing. Right, now before we do anything else, I'm going to answer or see if there are any more questions. So I'm just having a look at my screen below the camera there. Okay, Jim, you've asked another question. That's brilliant. Thank you. The tree and texture brush. It's hard to find anything quite like it here in North America. I'd love to use your brushes. Have you had any luck finding a distributor for your brushes here, please? The answer to that is no, I haven't had any luck, but we're changing tack. So originally what we've been looking for is a distributor, a distribution center. So we would send all of our, well, would send a few thousand brushes out to one location, then their software needs to link with our software so that when we receive an order, that goes to the warehouse in the US, and then they send it out. And it gets very complicated with duty and all of these sorts of things. So actually, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we are sort of erring more now on the side of maybe finding some art shops that we can sell to. So the smaller quantities, and then we'll list all of the retail outlets or websites that will that stock our brushes. And then you would go to their website. We'll let you know where they are, who they are, and then you can go there and buy direct from them. So that's probably what we're going to do. It's not ideal, but I think it will be certainly better for you. And hopefully the brushes will be, well, you won't have to pay hopefully as big a delivery charge and all of these things. But anyway, I suspect that's going to work out in the next year or so. If there are any shops that you particularly like using, that you feel could maybe supply our brushes to you, let us know. Let us know these shops. Send me an email, and these are shops that we'll contact. So hopefully it's something that we can sort out very soon. So that should be good. Okay, Lee. Hi, Mike. Great to watch you working as usual. Thank you very much, Lee. I wonder sometimes which to reach for when to reach for the thinner or the liquid. Is that what you mean? What's the fundamental difference between the two? Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So we've just talked a little bit about the use of Galkyd or liquid. They're I tend to think of them as very similar mediums, liquid and Galkyd. Just the drying time is slightly different. But the difference between using a thinner and a medium like liquid or Galkyd, that's very different. So a Galkyd is like or liquid. It's a thicker consistency. So it has a certain amount of body to it. It has the ability, I think, to give you more transparency, whereas thinner a little bit less so. If you really want, for example, as we were doing just there, if you wanted to put a glaze of black over the top, but you were just using thinner, it wouldn't give you quite the same transparency because it doesn't have the body. So it would remain, that color would remain almost black. It would be a little bit more difficult to separate the actual areas of brush, but probably the best way is to show you. Let's go over to here. Now, if this is the thinner, of course, if I add a small amount of thinner, I mean, that was a tiny amount of thinner that was, but there we are, there's our thinner. Now, if I add a little bit of black, and we work, I wonder whether you'll be able to see this, won't you, here? So just here, let's go angle that. Let me lift the painting up a bit just to show you. Saves me moving the camera. So this is the same sort of thing, I suppose, in a way. Because that is so thinned down. When you look back at the palette, it's just like it's almost like using water. It's slightly coloured, but look what happens. So you've now lost any sort of individual little brush marks that you can see here, because it has no body. It's just too fluid, and actually that's going to start to run. Now, if I decided that really the way to do it is to use black with a touch of thinner, I mean, there's thinner on the brush, so now we're looking at that. So that's, consistency wise, is probably a bit better, but even so, it's still not quite there, because look, once we've done that, that's then going to soften as it's starting to flow a little bit just around the edges here. So now we don't have quite the sharpness that we had here. That's got a lot softer. So maybe we need a little bit less thinner So just going back to the palette a second. So we're using less thinner now. So there's still thinner in that, but not as much. Back to the painting. Okay, so there we've got the level of sharpness that we need, but it's really quite dark now. It's too dark. It's nice and sharp, but it's too dark. There will be times when that's usable, but for what we were doing, not quite. That would probably work a little better if we were doing trees and things like that. But you know, you almost don't need to use any thinner at all. It'd do something. It'd be very similar if you just used the black. So if I mix up just some black now, that's got even less thinner in it, you should still be able to get the, you know, you're able to get the same level of detailing in there, but it's very, very dark. And for this part, it's, in my opinion, it's too dark. So all I'm going to do, let's just go back to the painting. Sorry about that. I'll show you here. Look, so we can see now that's too dark. When you're comparing it to this, the darker elements are nearer the areas within the stone and not the actual dark bits within the stone. So for example, if you look at this larger stone, well, let's look at this one here. I know that's generally a little bit lighter, but it has no real darks in it. There's one here as well. You know, it has sort of a grey, a warm grey, which is what we've done here, whereas that is black. That's showing out as black. So I'm going to wipe that off. Just lower that. Now wipe that off. And then continue. Now, I will show you where it does work is when you're okay with the darks. You want it to be darker. You know, you want it to be, I was going to say you want it to be sharper. We just talked about how you don't get the sharpness. That's more with that type of brush. If I wanted to get a sharp line with a rigger brush, which is what we're going to be doing now, that tends to work a little bit better. So let's have a look. Let's go to the palette first of all. Right, so we want it thinned down. And this will aid drying as well if you use some thinner. But can you see it's probably nearer this? There is thinner there, but there's a lot more pigment as well. Now, if I, excuse me. So if I now want to do some of the cracks within the stone work here, I can use our rigger brush and kind of draw almost as if I was using a pencil. I can actually draw the stone in. Now that's keeping a certain amount of sharpness. Can you see that okay? Because of the brush we're using. Now it's thinned down to the extent that it's not black. It's still giving us a little bit of the color. We could probably even thin it down a little bit more if we wanted to, but so this is how we're going to do this, just literally sketching now. I'm not copying this photograph precisely. In fact, I'm copying the way, I'm not copying each piece of stone here. If I did that, we'd be here for an awful long time. We're just trying to get this to look real. And we're using the photograph as a reference more than anything else. So unlike with brickwork, this can be quite uneven. There doesn't seem to be a huge amount of, well, I was going to say care and attention, but no. I'm sure whoever built this wall put a lot of effort into it, but it's not, you know, it's not as regimented, I suppose, is what I'm trying so badly to say. And obviously all of the areas of stone are a different size as well. But does that answer your question? There's a time and a place to use liquid and Galkid, and also to use thinner. With the thinner, we're able to get a really nice sharp line there that you can't do, or I would struggle to do with the liquid. Hopefully, Lee, that answers your question. Right, I'm going to have a quick look on Patreon to see what if there have been any other questions on there. Let's have a look. Actually, yes. You're very welcome, everybody. By the way, those of you that are just being very kind here, thank you for doing this, Grace. You're welcome, Grace. Thank you for joining us. Henrik, or Henk, sorry, Henk. I learned a lot in these sessions. Thank you very much. You're very, very welcome. Yes, Susan's asking, are you trying to paint in a linear direction with the glaze to mimic the stone? Yes, I was. Should have mentioned that. I think whenever I'm adding the darker elements to something, whether that's a bank of trees and you're trying to mimic canopies and things like that, yeah, I'm always sort of conscious of the way it's sort of working. So, for example, if there's a mountain coming in from the left or right hand side of a painting, I would be mimicking the line of the mountain. So I would be bringing my brush strokes down in that direction. Same is true if it's the other way. The wall, for example, I'll be doing the same thing. It just makes it easier. There's quite often there's a slight pattern, and even the way that this has been blocked in, you can see it's been blocked in a, you can still see some of the, I've done the same sort of process. Probably should be better off showing you here. You can see I've done the same thing here, because then when you come to do the details that we're doing here, you can use some of this. You can use that. So can you see how we've done the lighter parts here? So I will use that to sort of kind of, I'll go around the outside edge. There we are. That's perfect for that. There might be a bit of a gap in there, and then there's a smaller part there. We're using this. We're using these little marks in. Can you see? You might be able to just see it in here. There's a sort of like a round bit that's in the block in. Now we can even use part of that. So, for example, we can bring something through the middle, and then we've got the underside of that. Now, having that color change between the dark and the light, so what's going to make this look quite real. So if I'm painting grass, for example, quite often when I block grass in, I'll do a downward stroke when I do the grass, because that helps. You're always going to get these little, as you can see in here, the light areas where the paint's a bit thinner and the darker areas where the paint's gone on a bit thicker. You're always going to get that. And if they're moving in the right direction, like with grass, it's up and down, you can use that to your advantage. It's going to make it look more real. Okay, right, let's continue. So this is essential. I mean, I actually quite like doing this. I've always enjoyed doing these stone walls. I don't know why. I think it's because it's very effective and very quick. It doesn't take that long at all. And I'm adjusting the shape. I'm adjusting the gaps within them. And then if we do another one underneath here, can you see that's now left a gap there? Adjusting the size a little bit. Also, one of the things I am conscious of is the reference photograph is smaller. It's quite a bit smaller than the actual painting. So I have to make sure that I'm getting the actual stonework in the painting a little bigger. So something a bit more like that. So that's how we're going to do this wall. Now we've added the texture, we're adding the little darker elements, but this isn't, the bits that we're putting on here, they're not really, really dark. It's not black. We can still see some of the block in through, which is important. Kind of making a little bit of a meal of this. It's very, very effective. Let's just continue for a little bit longer. The gaps in this part of the wall here, obviously there's been some mortar in between, so you don't have quite the same darker little aspects. So that's how we do that. So just using black, I mean, it's a very versatile color, and I'm not really sure why it's frowned upon using black, because it's just so good. I suppose the one problem you could potentially have with this is you could generally go too dark on your painting, and that's something that I'm always conscious of. It became a little bit of a mantra between myself and my dad when we were sitting together working. He would always say to me, don't go too dark, because it was always a little bit of a weakness of mine. If ever anything was going to happen, it was going to be because I'd used perhaps a little bit too much black, gone a bit too dark, and the painting then becomes just overly contrasty and doesn't look right, doesn't look real. Let's get some bigger areas of stone in here. So do you have any questions on this technique? If you do, now's the time to ask. Speak up, don't be shy. So as you can see, I'm adjusting the size and shape of these little areas of stone and making sure that we get some gaps. But really what you're doing, if you think about it, is we are painting the gaps here. We're not painting the stones as such, the gaps in between the stones. So those are the bits that need to be, you know, we need to get as realistic as we can. So what you don't have in between each stone is a perfect thin line, because the stones aren't uniform. We're having to do a fair amount of filling in. But it's quite effective, isn't it? It works really well. So I'll persevere a little bit more with this. Let me know once again if you have any questions. But isn't that effective? Got all the detail already in place. Once you actually get this, all these shaded areas in here, there's very little actually left to do in order for it to look, you know, realistic. Because there's just all little lighter parts that we can add on. So make sure when you're doing your own wall that you have enough gaps in between the rocks because they're uneven. That's important that we do that. And as I said, not copying faithfully the reference photograph, just doing our own thing. There aren't actually many smaller little bits. Most of them are quite big. So I need to bear that in mind, really. So I actually haven't adjusted the paint now for a while. I'm still using the same paint. I haven't added any more thinner. Haven't really had to. At some point, it'll probably start to dry a bit, and then I'll need to either add, or I'll need to add some more thinner, of course, but possibly some more pigments as well. It's a little bit bigger, that stone there. So making sure I don't go too small again. Okay, so that's pretty much how we are doing that. But do you agree? I mean, that's starting to look quite 3D in a way. It's not bad at all. Not bad at all. And I think, in a way, that's why I kind of enjoy doing this sort of stonework. Yes, it is time-consuming, but boy, does it look great. So I've just now added some thinner. That's the first time I've adjusted the initial mix. So also with this, you can get this mix wrong as well. If it's too thin, it will run. If it's too thick, you're not going to get the sharp lines. It's going to be, imagine a pen that is starting to dry. You're going to get slightly broken lines. So you need the paint to be mixed correctly. In a second, we'll start working on this part here. We've been on for an hour. We're going to continue going for a while. I'm going to get a small section of the wall finished. So we have that stone there, and then as you can see, it wouldn't naturally join up with the stones above. There would be a slight gap. In fact, I think probably in the reference photograph, there are more gaps than I'm actually putting in. That's an unusual shaped stone there. A little bit of a funky shape. Okay, right. Let's just do a little bit more. Just finish this line up here, and then I'm going to add a few details so that you can see how it starts to come to life. So I'm going to add now just a little bit more thinner and a bit more pigment, going back to the state that it was in when we first mixed it. Just do a little small pebble in there. Okay, right. Now, before we move on to adding the highlights, I'm just going to work on this part here. This is very different. The colours, you don't have these dark gaps in between the rocks. You can see the joins. I'd say the stone is perhaps a little bit more regular. In fact, I would also say that some of this is coming into it a bit more. So let me just do that. I'll do so we've added this stone coming in. I'm then going to add another one, perhaps maybe here, just going in. Then we'll need to adjust the color a little bit. And perhaps another one there. Okay, so I'm going to clean the brush. We're going to add just these darker areas in between. So we know that it's not black. Let's have a look at the palette. We know it's not black. Let's go ahead. We're going to add some brown, some dioxazine. I'm just really looking to sort of mix up the darker tone that we can see in there. It's actually not too dark. It's sort of a little bit lighter. I'm going to also thin this down. Adding perhaps a little bit of blue as well. Right, let's just have a look. So the more we thin this, the more transparent it's going to be. See, that to me is a little bit too dark on the whole. It's not that dissimilar, is it, to the dark over here? So let's go back to there a second, lighten that slightly. Bit of thinner, bit of white, back to the painting. That's a bit better. It's quite uneven as well, the joins. And actually, I was going to say these are sort of single blocks, but I'm not going to do that. I think I'm going to break this into two. So they're not that clean. There's an awful lot of little marks. There, so that's giving you an idea of how I do that. Some darker elements in there as well, which we will do, but not just yet. Right, I'm going to just darken some parts now. And then while we're doing that, because we've brought a little bit more of that into here, I'm going to just adjust the color of that as well. So it's probably not dissimilar to this color here. I've just added a little bit of blue. I'm going to just lighten that a little bit more. Okay, it's a bit nearer to that. Not quite right. Okay, so now we've done that, let's just give the brush a clean. I'm going to just add a few lighter areas. Now, in the photograph, yes, we can see the leaves going over the top. Obviously, that's something we'll do later. Flowers as well, and also the stalks of the plant there. We'll put that on afterwards. We're just trying to get the base in place. So let's have a look first of all, see if we've had any more questions. So I'm going to put that brush to one side for a moment, give my back a little bit of a rest. Right, okay, let's see what we've got. So Eddie, thank you for joining us, Eddie. Eddie is asking, is your painting technique only limited to oil paint, or can you recreate the same painting using the same technique but instead using acrylics? You can pretty much do everything that I do here in oils. You can pretty much do that in acrylic as well. In fact, the only thing you can't do so well with acrylics is if you're looking to blend, so you want to paint wet in wet. Now that's how I would blend. So if I was looking for something that was particularly soft, well, actually, that said, you can get a retarder which slows down the drying time for acrylics. But everything else, so everything we're doing here, yeah, you can certainly do that with acrylics. The technique would be exactly the same. Of course, you'd be using water instead of thinner, as I am, and you'd be using an acrylic medium instead of the liquid or the Galkid that I'm using. But it would work in the same way. Yeah, no, everything is totally transferable. The picture of the lion that I showed you earlier has a soft background. That would be difficult, not impossible. There are artists that do some soft background, sort of short focal lengths in their paintings, and they use acrylics, so it is possible. I actually don't know what that technique would be, and I believe that you can do it. Perhaps some sort of retardant would help. But yeah, no, everything is transferable. So this is what I say to people. A lot of people that want to join my painting school, MJSTV, ask that, because there are a lot of acrylic artists out there. But yeah, no, totally transferable, almost everything. So I hope that answers your question. Jim asks, how did you decide on the dioxazine purple in the lighter portion of the wall? You often add it to mixes and I never see it in the reference. You know what, I think one of the things that I've developed over the years, and I think anyone, if you paint enough, you have the ability to see colors that, so for example, a reference photograph, I can look at a reference photograph and I can pick out the color in there, and I know almost exactly what colors I need to make it, and that's just through experience. So yeah, looking at the reference photograph, I'd say there's quite a lot of purple in there. It's the darker areas that I added in the gaps in this lighter bit of wall are quite a bit lighter. They are more of a grey, but grey, if you add black and white, you get a very warm grey. So if you want to cool that down a bit, you would then add something like blue. But then that tends to move over to sometimes you might have almost a red side to it as well. So you could add dioxazine purple, as I did, or if you've got it on your palette, you could have added alizarin crimson. It would have got you would have got somewhere in the ballpark of where you needed to be. But yeah, it's a personal thing. Sometimes I guess you might see colors differently to how I see them, in which case you would mix the color slightly differently. I don't know that it's I'm guessing it is a personal thing. I guess I'll see a color that you wouldn't see and vice versa. Doesn't mean it's not correct. Doesn't mean that we might do it in a different way but reach a similar result. But yeah, that's just I'll see a color. It's like I often think to myself, if I needed to color mix, sometimes you go and you'll buy some paint for your walls, and you take it to the local paint shop or whatever, and they'll mix the color and match the color. I think I'd do a pretty good job of, you know, if I had long enough, pretty good job of being able to do that. I'd be very confident that I could do it, you know, in sort of 5 or 10 minutes with the limited color palette that I use. There are colors that I do struggle to mix with this color palette, and those are things like some flowers have a much more potent, much stronger, certainly pinks, colors like that tend to be a little bit more difficult, and that's where you'd possibly need an extended color palette. But most of the time I can get pretty much there. And certainly with things like these, the subtle sort of pastel colors, yeah, I see the color and I can say, yes, that's got these 5 or these 6 colors in it. It's something I've developed. But am I doing it right? Am I doing it, you know, are you doing, if you're seeing different colors, is that correct? So in the eye of the beholder, I guess. Hopefully that answers your questions. Pretty poor answer, I know. Right, so let's have a look, see what other questions we have. Right. Okay, Marcia, let's have a look. I have to unlock my phone. Does it recognize me? Yes, it does. That's good. Are you trying to, hi Mike, looking close to the photo is actually the shadows of the gaps in the stone that you're actually just darkening the stone's color. What a great technique they use. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's the shade. It's you're darkening it. You're not, you know, you're using that block into your advantage, just adjusting the tones, adjusting the levels. How come you did not start the brickwork from the bottom up? Any particular reason? Yeah, it was just because I wanted the area that I was working on to be in the center, or near the center of the monitor. So although it's not, I know it is further down, but it's pretty simple reason really. If I wanted to start at the bottom, I would have had to move the camera, and when you get to that point where you're having to move cameras around while you're live on air, it can get a little bit tricky, a little bit difficult. So I'm just trying to simplify it really. If I was working on this, you know, without you guys watching, without cameras being in the way, yeah, I would have done it differently. My son just came over and said, this is Marcia again, thank you, Marcia, he is painting each stone, isn't he? Yeah, well, sort of, yeah, painting the gaps in between. Yeah, so I think that's all of the questions up to now. Please feel free to ask any more if you have any. Getting a bit of a dry mouth, so I have some water. Okay. Right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to add just, I think, a little bit more detail to the lighter stonework, and then we're going to go ahead, or the darker details, then we're going to go ahead and add some of the lighter elements. So let's change to this camera. You know what, guys, I think I've done not a bad job today of actually changing the cameras over correctly, because quite often I'm not on the correct camera. So all I'm doing off camera there, you can't see it, but I'm just drying the tree and texture brush that was sitting in the thinner. Right, so now let's add just a few more little darker elements, not too much. I might use a mixture of that brown that I already had there and a touch of the black. I just want to just add a little bit more texture. And I'm kind of not doing a blanket color over the whole thing here. Just a few darker little areas. Not too much. Something like that. You can even if you need to go over this with some darker elements, you can do that as well. You can go over, even though I've just added the darker shades, if you're just going to use black paint to darken, to add the gaps, you can go straight over the top. You're not going to disturb anything. Because even with regular oil paints, which I'm using here, you know, if it's thinned down, it will start to dry. It will start to dry sort of quite quickly, or surprisingly quickly, really. So just a few more little darker bits. then we can go ahead and lighten up. Now, you'll have to let me know, of course, how much of this painting you actually want to see. We can do the whole thing, every little element live, or I could probably, what I would favour doing, although it is up to you, and I would probably favour working on it a little bit in between, just getting some of the less interesting elements done. But yeah, let me know, how much of this do you want to see? Do you want to see it all? Would you like to see something different next after I've shown you this? It's up to you. Okay, so there we've added a few more darker bits, but actually it's looking pretty close. Now, one of the things I will say, and this is the same, it'd be the same if I was taking a photograph rather than a video. Where I'm sitting, looking at this in real life, in real time, this is very similar color-wise to that. But when I look down here on my monitor, where I can see the whatever shot you can see, it looks different. The color looks different. And I think that's the same for everyone. I think it's, you know, the cameras are all sort of calibrated and what have you, and the lighting is the same there as it is here, as it is here. But it does look different when you're looking at it through a lens, which is quite frustrating. But looking at the monitor, this is much lighter, and mine looks less colorful and darker. But as I'm looking at it here, sitting in the studio, they are very similar color-wise. That's quite frustrating. Okay. Anyway, we won't worry too much about that. Right. What I'm going to do, once again, I was going to say off camera, I'm just going to take the excess paint off of that brush. I'm going to continue using this just for a minute, because I think the areas on the wall here, there are some parts that are quite a bit lighter, more so on here than on this part. So I'm going to move over now to the a lighter color, basically. Let's pop over to here. Now trying to mix up the lighter colors on here. So as I compare, we obviously have quite a lot of light. So I'm going to go with the white first of all, and then I'm going to color that white so that we can get near to it. And then what I tend to do is I mix obviously on the palette, and then I hold it against the photograph. You can even, you know, touch it on the photograph if you want to. I hold it against the photograph, and I try and work out what colors are needed. So as far as I'm concerned, what I need is some yellow in there, but not the cool yellow, which is that one. It's the warmer yellow. It's a very strong color. So, and I've gone over the top with that, but that's not, you know, we are not finished yet. So I'm going to add a small amount of dioxazine. I hold that up to the photograph again. I'm going to add a bit more burnt umber, touch of orange, starting to warm that up a little bit. Back to the painting, holding it up. Still too much yellow. A bit more burnt umber. Now let's have a look. Let's go back here. Now I'm going to try, or attempt to just try and keep this sort of localized a bit more. I don't want to go over the darker bits, the joins too much. So this has no medium or thinner with it. I'm obviously not going to do the whole thing. I'm just trying to This needs to, there's a fair amount going on here, so. And also it's worth remembering that we are trying to get it close. Generally speaking, when you're working on a, or certainly when I'm working on a, I don't know, not so much when I'm working on it. I was going to say, generally speaking, when you're working on a painting, you're the only one that is going to see the reference photograph. But in my case, that's not rarely true these days. But with that in mind, you know, you're just trying to get it close. People won't see it next to the reference photograph. Right, I'm going to go over to the rigger brush now. I'm thinning the paint down. Risk going back to there. I'm adding some orange because there are some elements of orange in here as well. Just little spots here and there. Thanks. Add a bit more orange off camera. A bit more orange and yellow. In fact, I would say probably more yellow than orange. So the reason I'm using the rigger brush is because getting the doing the texture with a tree and texture brush, as good as that is, it's very difficult to do it, or to keep your brush strokes, your brush marks in the right place. It's because it's a larger brush. It's just not localized enough. So we try and recreate that a little bit with this brush, and not doing a hugely brilliant job. You know, just clean that brush out, and I'm going to don't worry, I know it's off camera. I've just added a little bit more black here because I just want to add a little bit more detailing. Okay, all right. So I can see that's not not entirely finished. I'm going to probably just go back to the tree and texture brush just a little bit more and add a few lighter parts just here and there, just to these ones. They're not. It's difficult with these ones to use this technique with the smaller stones because, as I say, you can't localize the brush strokes well enough. All right, so heading back to the rigger then. And then just adding some of the lighter points to these rocks here. So I don't know what that is. It's white, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how you pronounce it. Is it lichen or lichen? So just some little white areas. Well, not whites, they're some more grey. And that's how we're going to do this. So it's not on every piece of stone either. It's just here and there. Okay, I'm going to go back to the tree and texture brush again, just take off the excess paint. We do have some lighter areas, some more of that orangey colour. Let's just see how that works. What I want to be careful of is that I don't put this over the gaps in between the stone. So that's kind of the deal. That's what we're looking at there. Obviously, if you don't have that to look at, all of a sudden what you're looking at is a little bit, well, it looks better, doesn't it? You're comparing it to the photograph constantly. It's never going to look quite as good, but gives you an idea of what we're looking at. So that's essentially how I would do this. You could spend a lot more time, working on that, getting all the little elements, all the little colors in there. I mean, if I look at this photograph myself, I mean, there's a million different colors just in those stones. You know, there's blues and crikey, oranges, all sorts of colours, and you really could go to town with it. You just need to decide yourselves how much needs to be put in. And sometimes when you take that reference photograph away from the painting, you put it to one side, you know, out of your view, I think you'll look at your own painting in a slightly different way. I know, for example, when I've got that, if I've got that there, which you need to have it next to your painting, or whether that's on a tablet or photograph, you need to have it next to it so that you can get it as near as possible. But you know, you have to decide how near does it need to be. It's different. What we're doing here is different from hyperrealism, which I've done, and it's very time consuming. And you are trying to get every element as perfect as possible. With this, I'm not. I'm trying to get it to look realistic. I'm trying to get it to look good, look nice, but just bear in mind the end viewer isn't going to see it next to the photograph, so isn't going to be able to compare how accurate or how near it is. I mean, do you need to be that near? This is, after all, your reference. You're using it for that purpose, just for reference. So, okay, let's have a look, just quickly see if we have any more questions before we end. Also, let me know whether you do want to see me continue with this, or whether you'd like to see something different. I did actually get quite a good question. Where was it? I think it might have been an email. Anyway, it was somebody had asked if, sorry, I can't remember who it is now, but I can have a look if I look on my emails. But they were asking if we had a painting that was divided, say, in 4 ways, and I could show 4 different techniques in that you could then take on, you know, yourself and using your own work. So that's something else we could do, and we can, you know, we've looked today at the tree and texture, but we can look at other techniques as well. Let me know if you'd like to see something like that. But let's just have a quick look, see what else there is. Any plans for a smaller, this is from Susan, thanks Susan, any plans for production of a smaller tree and texture brush? That's a very good idea, and that would be ideal for something like this. I actually don't have any plans just yet, but it is a good idea, and I'll definitely give that some thought. Thank you, Susan. Definitely gives a stone look to it. Absolutely brilliant. Thanks, Marcia. Also, my sons and I are getting closer to getting my room ready so I can begin painting. I only hope that I do not disappoint myself. It has been 48 years since I painted last in oil. 48 years, no time. But it was not a photorealistic method, because that was frowned upon back then. Yeah, photorealism. I mean, I've been painting now for, gosh, I was 17 when I started. I'm 46. I worked that out. It's a long time. I've been painting for a long time, and I've always painted in a sort of a photorealistic style. But yeah, there were artists doing it. I mean, the hyperrealistic movement's been going since what, the 50s or 60s, something like that. But I think it's gaining popularity. Still get the odd comment saying you might as well just take a photograph, and yes, could easily take a photograph, but it wouldn't be as much fun. But yeah, I think it's gaining in popularity, and I'm glad that you're going to start painting in oils again. I love it. I think it's brilliant. You can do so much with it. You just need a little bit of patience, because you need to wait for things to dry. But you could use alkyd paints. They dry really quickly. Same techniques, just a quicker drying paint. So anyway, I think that's everything. I don't think there are any more questions. If there are, I apologize if I hadn't seen them. It was really nice spending the last hour and a half with you all. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. Look forward to seeing your comments, any more questions. The next live stream will be within a month. My apologies for the last one being this one being a bit delayed. But anyway, as I say, hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did, and I shall see you all in the next live stream. Just got to work out now how to turn it all off. I think it's probably this button here. We'll see. Goodbye, everybody.